made in the USA. When you saw the jets, they flew low. We were terrified. They flew so low, there was a sonic boom through the city. People said, this is what they do to the Palestinians every day. They will not frighten us. But that is what US money is being spent on the arms to keep the people down. One other 2 points I want to make. One is women are at the center of this revolution. All this nonsense about we're going to Afghanistan to give women's liberation at the point of a gun and bombing people. There is women's liberation happening in that square. Women wearing the hijab or the niqab or neither are part of this revolution, and it's a tremendous sight to see. It was absolutely magnificent. And I saw on the television when I came back young women breaking rocks to help fight back Mubarak's thugs. That's women's liberation, and they're making themselves their own history in that square. But I think my final point is they're not broken, they're still fighting, and they're a beacon of hope, not just in Egypt, but across the Arab world and across the globe. We need to give them solidarity. We give them solidarity here, but I tell you what, one bit of good solidarity would be, why don't we try and bring down our own government, the warmongers and the cutters? Let's do that. Victory to the Egyptian revolution.
Thank you very much, Judith. And one thing that does connect deeply all these events is Islamophobia and Muslim baiting, the disgraceful attacks made by David Cameron today, speaking in Munich, and of course the EDL march in Luton. And I'm sure we'd all here today like to send our solidarity to the anti-fascist demonstrators who are confronting the EDL and the police in Luton today. Over the last week, as part of its desperate efforts to stay in power, the Mubarak regime has been systematically attacking journalists trying to bring the truth out of Egypt about what's happening in Cairo. And I'd now like to welcome to speak to you Donna DeLong, a Vice President of the National Union of Journalists, who'll talk about what's been done to journalists by the Mubarak regime. Donna.
Obviously, Judith mentioned some of the way that the uprising in Egypt is being reported over here. But what we've got to remember is the reason we know the real story is because of other journalists. There are hundreds of journalists from all around the world in Egypt at the moment, from lots of different perspectives, from lots of different organizations. But the one thing that unites them is that they are all under sustained attack by the Egyptian state. The Committee to Protect Journalists has counted 101 attacks on journalists of many different kinds. Some of them have been attacked at knife point by some of the government's thugs. Others have been arrested and detained. One journalist, an Egyptian journalist, was shot a week ago trying to cover the demonstration, and he died yesterday. So I'd like for us all to join in solidarity with Ahmed Mohamed Mahmoud, who was killed and died yesterday as one of the first journalistic victims of the regime. Let's hope he's the last victim of it. But we've got to remember that this is still going on. Only yesterday, Al Jazeera, which I'm sure virtually everybody here knows, has been giving the truth and reporting it. Everyone's been glued to Al Jazeera to find out what's been going on. Yet their offices were closed by the regime on Sunday. Only yesterday, the head of their bureau, based in Cairo, was arrested along with one of his colleagues. The state is still trying to shut down the message, still trying to shut down the truth. And it's not just professional journalists. We've also heard that they've tried to shut down access to Twitter, access to Facebook, access to all of the things that are allowing the ordinary people of Egypt to get their story out and challenge some of the things that are being reported by others. So this is what's important. It's not just about the professionals. It's not just about the people who are employed and paid by companies. It's about everyone's freedom of speech and everyone's right to get the story out. And what we've got to remember is that in comparison with some of the countries in the region, Egypt was the more liberal one in terms of the media. As we see the possibility of demonstrations and actual demonstrations in Sudan, in Algeria, in Syria, in Yemen, across the region, all of these countries have an even worse record for oppressing the media. How do we know there weren't demos in Syria yesterday? We know people had called for them, but actually there's very little free media in the country, and we may not hear when things happen. So we've got to fight not just in solidarity with the Egyptian people, but fight in solidarity with all of the journalists who want you to know what's going on, want all of us to know what's going on, and fight against states and thugs who want to shut down the message and shut down freedom of speech. Thank
Thank you very much, Donaher. People occasionally have been asking in the last week, why is Stop the War organising in support of the Egyptian people? Well, one of the reasons is because we were founded to oppose the war on terror. And without the corrupt puppet regime of Mubarak and those like him in the Middle East, there could have been no war on terror. And when they are overthrown, there will be no war on terror. Our struggle in support of the Egyptian people's struggle, is directed against the whole system of imperialism and neo-colonialism in the Middle East. And so it's an honour now to invite to speak to you one of the great anti-imperialist campaigners of the last 40 years. Please welcome Tariq Ali.
For 30 years, the West has been backing dictatorships in Egypt. For 30 years, they have been telling us that all is well in Egypt, that this is a moderate regime. This was, and remains still now, about to be overthrown, we hope, a brutal dictatorship kept in power by the Egyptian military. Don't forget that. Without military support internally, Mubarak could not have stayed in power. And the fact that the military itself is now divided, with the generals scurrying to Washington to get orders, but lots of junior officers and soldiers fraternizing with the people, that was the decisive event of this mass uprising, when the soldiers began to fraternize with the people. We have seen it before in parts of Europe, in other parts of the world. We saw it in Iran in 1977 when the army refused to open fire on demonstrators trying to topple the Shah. So what happens over the next weeks is going to be determined to a certain extent on how divided and how split this army is. Have no doubt. What the United States would like to do in Egypt is to replace Mubarak with a lesser-known torturer, Suleiman. But we know Suleiman. We know him well. We know who he is. We know what he has done since the so-called war on terror began. We know that he's in and out of London and Washington, talking to the intelligence agencies, helping them out, torturing people that they are a bit shy to torture in this country or the United States or in Guantanamo. It's Suleiman, backed by Mubarak and the generals who made Egypt into a torture camp, where prisoners gathered from all over the world, leaving aside the Egyptian dissidents themselves, were tortured. So the message of the comrades, the brothers and sisters in Tahrir Square is very clear. No to Mubarak, but no also to Suleiman. We want this entire regime to go, and we want the secret state through which Mubarak has ruled, backed by the West. This secret state has to be dismantled, and the people are already beginning to do it. Because when you read in the newspapers, pro-Mubarak supporters, in a country where the security forces number 2 to 3 million and are told to take off their uniforms and go into Tahrir Square and brutalize the courageous Egyptians who have gone there, they are not people. They are mercenaries in the pay of the Mubarak dictatorship. This is an isolated regime. Isolated by its people, isolated now in the Arab world at large, but kept going by the power that resides there. and its satraps, its agents in the European Union. It is the West who has kept this regime going. And who are the leaders? The Americans are now saying, yes, yes, it's awful. Well, thank you very much. It required millions of people on the streets. It required 300 deaths and 5,000 injured people to make you realize. But there's one rogue who still won't understand what's happening in the Middle East. Tony Blair. Mubarak is a force for good. Well, we know what Tony Blair's idea of good and evil is. We know that 200 people dead in Egypt are small beer, because he supported the killing of nearly 1 million people in Iraq, so 200 compared to that is nothing. These are the politicians of the West, shameless, corrupt, visionless, incapable of doing anything when they see a genuine mass uprising, but deliberately trying to create fake uprisings in those parts of the world where the leaders don't do their bidding. And one more thing. Ask yourselves, how is it that the Arab street came alive? The much mocked, the much condemned Arab street, where American newspaper columnists like Friedman used to say and boast, we took Iraq. Where was the Arab street? And have no doubt that what is happening in Egypt today is also a response to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the crushing of Palestine. Angry, defeated for a period, demoralized, the Arab nation, not just the Egyptian people. The Arab nation is awakening. Let us not forget the courageous young people on the streets of Tunis who sparked off this uprising. Let us salute. And do you know that when the Tunis uprising was taking place, Nicolas Sarkozy and his defense minister offered to send French paratroopers in to defend their favorite dictator? Well, why didn't they? Because before they could organize it, he was on a plane out. And where was he on a plane out to? To Saudi Arabia. Another democracy. To Saudi Arabia, where he can access his bank accounts very quickly because all the banks are there in Riyadh, so no problem. So Mubarak has a choice. Where do you want to go, Hosni Mubarak? Saudi Arabia. Texas is possible, but Saudi Arabia might be safer for another few years. It will fall, but it will take another decade to get rid of that corrupt and criminal regime, which has backed every Western war since it was founded. It will come, the revolution in Saudi Arabia, have no doubt about it. And the Western politicians who are now realizing that Mubarak is a dictator, have they forgotten Yemen? Where for the last 3 weeks there have been demonstrations every single day against a dictator who uses the fictitious presence of Al-Qaeda to strengthen himself and his dictatorship. He's now torturing, and he's scared. And do you know what he said? Please let me stay in power for another few years, and I promise you my son won't succeed me. That is the democracy the Americans and their European puppets have been backing in the Yemen. That is what they've been doing in Egypt. But let them look. Listen to the bells of Tunis. Listen to the bells and the noises and the chants of Cairo. They are tolling for you. They are tolling for all the regimes that backed all this. And one mustn't forget, in this time of joy and Arab Renaissance, the fate of our Palestinian brothers and sisters for whom we've been fighting now for many years.